Chapter 8 Smile. The two boys with stars in their eyes and scars on their hearts soon found themselves stood in a dingy ice cream parlor, its best years definitely far behind it. It was empty save the aging man behind the counter, an apron tied sloppily around his waist. The floor was tiled black and white, and the plastic bar stools popped a bright red. They picked their flavors and slipped into a booth in the far corner, concealed from the protruding eyes of the only employee. "I can't believe you picked rum and raisin," Corey criticized once they'd taken their seats. He did what he always did and pulled his legs up onto the bench, his knees hugged close to his chest. "Shut up, it's my favorite flavor," Dorian shot back jokingly. "Better than boring old strawberry. I don't even like it that much." Corey shrugged. "It was my mom's favorite flavor. I always order it now, for her." A stab of pity tinged Dorian's chest. "What happened?" He pressed gently. "She died when I was 8. Corey said simply. No emotion, no weight, no feeling. It was a simple statement. Maybe Corey's youth died with his mother. His will to smile, to laugh, to live the life she lost. From the way Dorian saw it, Corey didn't think he deserved happiness. He thought he didn't deserve affection, passion, someone to tell him he meant so much more than words on a page. But he had no one. "I'm sorry," Dorian gulped. "What about your dad?" Corey asked, raising his perceptive eyes, burning into Dorian's very soul, if such a thing even existed. "He left when I was a baby. My mom wasn't stable and he couldn't deal with it anymore." "That sucks." Corey kept his eyes on Dorian as if he was scared to look away. If his gaze drifted, he might drift too. He might get lost in the storm of agonizing thoughts and unsolvable puzzles whirling around his head. Dorian shrugged. "So?" He grinned, leaning forward to try and lighten the conversation. "Got your eye on anyone?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we were still 12 years old." "Oh, come on. There's gotta be someone." Dorian rolled his eyes. "Not really." Corey lied. "What about you? Any girls you want to pretend to fall in love and then dump when you get bored?" Dorian rose his brows, smiling in amusement. "I'm not like the rest of the rugby team. I don't do that." "How many girlfriends have you had?" "Only 3. None of them serious." He shrugged. "And what about your love life? Any boyfriends? Did you just assume my sexuality?" "You just assumed mine." "That's very true." Dorian laughed and the boys paused their conversation as the waiter arrived with their sundaes, placing them onto the stained table along with 2 spoons. "Enjoy," he murmured before shuffling back to his position behind the counter. "So?" Dorian pushed, digging into his ice cream hungrily. "Do you like boys or girls?" "Boys." Corey shrugged, shoveling a spoonful of his strawberry ice cream into his mouth. He wasn't exactly ashamed of his sexuality, he just never talked about it. Most people from school already assumed he was gay, even before he realized it himself. Velvet never suspected, never asked, never even mentioned it. She just knew, right from the start. And his dad, well, he never spoke to his dad. Dorian didn't even bat an eyelid. "Do you want me to set you up? I know a really sweet guy." "Whoa, no." Corey interrupted before he could finish. "I'm fine. Seriously." "Whatever you say." Dorian laughed. "How do you think they're getting on?" he asked, referring to their 2 friends they'd left at the arcade. "Chances are, they won't even notice their absence. I never knew she liked him." "Lucky you." Ty never shut up about it. "He's fancied Velvet since he was 11. I couldn't imagine falling for someone like that." Corey leant back in his seat, leaving his ice cream barely touched. Feeling something so powerful for someone you don't know. And the endurance of it. 6 years. It's hard to believe it's even possible to like someone with such intensity. "I don't know." Dorian disagreed. Chapter 9 Bruised Heart. When Corey awoke on Monday morning, he felt a weightless sensation of tingles spreading warmly throughout his body. He felt different. As if the chemicals within his body were just slightly altered, slightly shifted, slightly off. But only slightly. Because that's what an intense infatuation did to someone. It changed you, but only slightly. It didn't spin your entire life around and splash a black and white world in an array of vibrant colors. It didn't play sweet music in your ears and let the sun shine just for you. The world carried on, life carried on. But now, there was someone on your mind, someone you couldn't stop thinking about. Because that's what Corey Winters kept calling it. An infatuation. It wasn't a crush, a love story, a little thought to occupy his mind. It was an infatuation. And what was an infatuation but a short-lived, intense burning of longing and desire? So intense, sometimes it can even be mistaken as love. But so short-lived, it would pass without leaving so much as a shadow of a dent on his life. So, that's what he was going to do. Wait for it to pass, and soon enough, he'd be able to look at Dorian without his chest tightening and stomach twisting. At least, that's what he hoped. When he arrived at school, Velvet was waiting for him by his locker, twirling a curl of her chestnut hair between her fingers. She smirked as he approached, her happiness spilling out onto every one of her pretty features. "Hi!" she squeaked. "Hey!" Corey rolled his eyes. "It was a good date then?" "The best." She giggled, hugging her folder close to her chest, her head tilting back in pleasure at the mere memory of it. "Doesn't seem like you had too bad of a time either. Where did you guys sneak off to?" "We just got ice cream." Corey shrugged. "And that doesn't mean anything. It was loud and dark in there. We needed to leave." "Whatever you say." She laughed, ruffling his hair affectionately. "I have to go. Chemistry's calling." She winked. "See you at lunch." Corey grabbed his things from his locker, gathered them up into his arms and headed to English. But Dorian's seat was empty. 10 minutes into the lesson and he still hadn't arrived. After half an hour, Corey had given up hope of him coming in at all. "That's 2 lessons in a row now, Corey." Miss Safar had pulled him aside at the end of the lesson, the echo of the bell ringing in their ears, students filing out steadily. "If you and Dorian aren't ready to present next lesson, I'm taking you both down a grade." "I'm sorry, miss." Corey tried to reason with her. "I honestly don't know where he is today." Miss Safar's amber eyes studied him carefully. "Do you feel Dorian's letting you down? Because if that's the case, I can always rearrange the seating plan to No. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not trying to pin the blame on him or anything. Corey, you're one of my top students." She lowered her voice as if a change in tone made her sound more serious. "If you don't feel you're reaching your full potential, I can move you next to someone Please, Mississippi." He begged. "It's not Dorian. He's not holding me back." She sighed, examining his expression carefully. Those desperate to achieve intellectual superiority had a tendency to do that, appear thoughtful, like they were considering what you had to say very carefully. It was all an attempt to grasp onto the dwindling amount of authority they held, and Corey almost wanted to scoff at the action. "Why are you so reluctant to enter this poetry competition? We think you're the perfect candidate to represent the school. No one writes quite like you, Corey. No one writes like him because no one is him." It was a stupid thing to say, even for Miss Safar. No 2 people wrote the same, it was impossible. Maybe they wrote about the same topic, used the same rhyme structure, the same style. But it wasn't the same. "What do I get?" Corey asked, hitching his backpack up on his shoulder as it started to ache. Miss Safar rose her brows. "Look. Chapter 10, The Sound of Your Heartbeat." Dorian hadn't slept in a couple of days. Not properly anyway. He'd managed to snag a few hours at the hospital, napping on the plastic chairs in the waiting room, but it was shallow and disturbed. His eyes stung and brain ached. All he wanted to do was curl up in bed and forget the world. Forget the people who screw you over after pretending to care. He wanted to shut it all out. But he couldn't miss any more school. 1 day off was enough. So, on Tuesday, he dragged his tired body away from the hospital, rubbing his weary eyes and trying to tame his unruly hair. He was late. The corridors were deserted and everyone was packed away in their respective classrooms. He took his time, dawdling to his locker, dragging his heavy feet behind him. The reluctance weighing down his consciousness was almost inexpressible. He didn't want to be here, but he had to be. Because Dorian refused to be selfish for even a second. He lived for everyone but himself. Too many people relied on him, trusted him, loved him. And he'd never paused to take a moment for himself. Maybe it was slowly destroying him, but he wasn't going to change. Dorian Price was just too selfless for his own good. Corey hated himself today. He hated himself every day, but today that emotion was just highlighted, emphasized, blown up 1,000,000 times until it took over his entire life. Just for today. He thought he looked ugly. He felt ugly. His busted lip and bruised eye. The marks, the scratches, the cuts and healed-over scars painted onto his delicate white skin. His cotton jumper was tugged past his fingers to conceal as much skin as possible, and the beanie pulled down almost to his eyes effectively hid the gash staining his forehead. His limp was harder to hide. He gritted his teeth and tried to walk normally, ignoring the sharp stab with every step. He wanted to draw as little attention to himself as possible. He didn't need any more stares or murmurs of concern. He didn't need velvet fretting or teachers sending him to the school counselor. It would be difficult, especially with his swollen eye dusted in a dark bruise as evidence of his father's brutality. But he would try. And the first step of his plan was to arrive at school almost 20 minutes late in the hopes that the hallways would be quiet and empty. "What the fuck happened to your face?" Dorian spotted Corey first. Corey flinched at the sound of Dorian's voice, so sharp, harsh, demanding. There was something different in his tone. Something of indescribable exhaustion. He wasn't in need of sleep, it wasn't that type of tired. He just needed a break. A break from everything. Life was what exhausted him. Corey glanced up through thick lashes and realized that Dorian appeared as tired as he sounded. Purple circles outlined his eyes, slightly puffy and tinted red from a lack of sleep. Dorian marched towards the shorter boy and grabbed his chin, examining his face in alarm. "It's nothing." Corey shoved him off and took a couple of defensive steps back. It wasn't nothing. He was battered, broken, beaten. It almost split Dorian's heart right in two. He could only imagine the damage hidden beneath layers of clothes and self-loathing. The thought grew an almost unrecognizable force within him. Anger, pity, sorrow. He suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of protectiveness for the boy stood before him. Did he do that? Dorian was angrier than Corey had ever seen him. His fists were clenched, his veins swelling, his eyes desperate and concerned. "Did that piece of Sheeta?" "That's my father," Corey snapped. "Don't talk about him like that. Have you looked in a mirror recently?" "What type of fucking father, Dorian?" Corey interrupted, grabbing onto his shoulders to try and steady his temper. "Calm down, what's wrong with you?" His soothing touch was almost enough for Dorian's burning anger to boil away. He took a deep breath and focused on his shoelaces and thought. "Sorry," he whispered. "I haven't gotten much sleep. I'm sorry, Ishul."